So that risky mega investment could pay off for some, but what about for Brazilians overall? To discuss that, I spoke with Mauricio Moura, Managing Director of IDEIA. I began by asking him about the direct financial returns for residents.
Actually, there is a study from a business school in Rio, actually saying that for each $100 of investment in the Olympics, the people were getting back $45. So they were kind of expecting this tourism, but the overall benefit was not that clear in terms of economics.
And being that it is still early, the game's obviously still going on, but let's also look at some of the key legacies, some of these things that were built in order to support this influx of tourists. You have your transportation, you have some of these incredible buildings. What do you think will be the lasting impact?
I think there are four main issues that had an impact. First one, it's the transportation, as you mentioned. Rio now has a new metro subway line that connects two distant parts of the city. Rio got a new, what they call bus rapid system that also it was built for the Olympic Games. It's going to be a huge legacy for the population. Also, they rebuilt the downtown area of Rio, so what they call the Olympic Boulevard. That was like a very bad area, and now they rebuilt to the Olympic Games. So, and on top of that, the last one, of course, the international airport in Rio was rebuilt, and it had like a private concession for the Olympics. So those are the key legacies that we see.
And in terms of the areas of Brazil and the sectors that have really benefited the most from the Olympics, what are some of the standouts? In general, I think the infrastructure areas, because they had to build new transportation, they had to work on the airport, not only Rio, but the other cities that hosted the Olympics. I was mentioned the football was played in São Paulo, in Brasilia, in Manaus. So basically the infrastructure was the main sector. Some people claim that it happened that people start to learning more English to receive the tourists, but that was very small compared to the infrastructure sector. Now, what about the areas that are still in need of development? Obviously, they couldn't cover everything, and even some of the venues they weren't able to finish. So what are some of the areas, and perhaps even the sectors, that could use more investment right now in Brazil?
Specifically about the Olympics, what was not well done was the Guanabara Bay, that the people didn't work out with the pollution. They did work to reduce partially the pollution, but they didn't do the full job. Of course, Rio is still a divided city with a lot of poor areas. Rio still has a lot of issues in terms of the security and violence. So those are the topics that, of course, they built an infrastructure for the Olympic period, but there's a lot to be done for the general population afterwards.
And speaking of that, some people are wondering, how long will it take for the economic windfall from the Olympics to make it to some of the poorer communities and the people who are really in need?
That's a good question. Overall, economically speaking, the Olympic Games are not a good deal especially for the poor.
How so?
Actually, because all the benefits, let's take Rio, for example. Most of the infrastructure was done in the areas that are more privileged areas of Rio. Of course, those transportation acts were good for overall population, but it's still Rio, London, Beijing, and Athens. The legacy was not clear for people that really benefit from tourism or for infrastructure.
And what do you think still needs to be done then in order to try and perhaps spread out some of that wealth?
I think Brazil has, first of all, to tackle the macroeconomic issues right now. There's clearly an economic crisis, and it's have greater unemployment rates and everything, so that has a huge impact on the population. But overall, I think Rio, any city that hosts the Olympic Games, has to work more on the connection of the poor and areas with the more developed areas, and that is a long way to be done.
Now, as we step back and we look at how the games have gone, how do people in Brazil feel about the amount of money spent versus the economic benefits that they're actually expecting to receive?
That's a good question. One of the things that made Brazil host the Olympics was that in 2009, 92% of the Rio population and 90% of Brazilian population were in favor of hosting the games. Because of the political crisis, because of the economic crisis, like the 4 months before the games, Brazil was divided. Half of the people were against the games and half of the people were in favor.
interesting thing that after the games, now in Rio, we had a poll last week, and 65% of Cariocas, of the Rio population, now they see the Olympic Games as positive. So there is a divided feeling among the Brazilians. But on the other hand, it's important to mention that the Rio Olympics, the total budget was 20% public money, 80% private money, exactly the opposite of the London Olympics. So there's a lot of division and controversy about that in Brazil.